the old bridge in the park. The children of the town knew better than to cross the old bridge in the park, especially during the evening hours on foggy nights. Even the grown-ups stayed clear, knowing that those who dared venture were doomed to never be seen again. And everyone knows grown-ups are usually pretty naive when it comes to such matters. They even made an effort to stop people from crossing the bridge by putting up a gate that closes every night about an hour before sundown, just to block access to the park. The grown-ups seemed so proud of themselves for protecting the little ones, and so the children didn't quite have the heart to tell them that it was a waste of money, better spent buying birthday and Christmas presents. Everyone knew better than to cross the bridge, so there was no reason for a gate at all. Unfortunately, Eleanor was a nobody. Even if she was somebody, she was a very, very stupid little girl. Born and raised in the next town over, little Eleanor had only recently moved to when her parents got divorced and her father and new stepmother got full custody of her. Though she did fancy the idea that she was just too clever to get along with other children, the opposite was in fact true. She was nearly as ignorant as a grown-up, constantly questioning things and demanding evidence for every trivial truth. Some of the more harsh rumors claimed that she didn't believe in ghosts, aliens, or even the completely inarguable fact that the 4th grade homeroom teacher, Mr. Mason, was a werewolf-demon hybrid from heck, who worked for the devil himself. Thus, Eleanor had rightfully replaced paste-eating Patty as the village idiot in elementary school. Even so, Eleanor was very prideful. No matter how much the other children chastised her for saying silly things like, "There's no such thing as baby-eating sewer clowns," she persisted. It wasn't long before everyone just started avoiding her, fearing that her blatant disrespect of the supernatural would make her dangerous and unlucky. At first, Eleanor didn't seem to mind too much, as her vanity deluded her into thinking that she was better off alone anyway, since apparently she was so much more intelligent than all of the other children anyway. Still, even nobodies get lonely. And so, when she heard the other children discussing the matter of the old bridge in the park, she couldn't help but butt in. "Oh, come on. How is an old bridge going to eat children? It's just a bunch of stones." The children have heard her say many strange things, but this time, she had gone too far. Even the grown-ups knew how dangerous the old bridge was, and a few of the kinder and more patient ones gave Eleanor a pitiful glance, reminding themselves that she just didn't know any better. But while things like Mr. Mason and sewer clowns were survivable, the old bridge in the park promised a at least bazillion% chance of never being seen again. Sure, the children hated Eleanor, but they wouldn't wish such a fate upon even the worst of little girls. They begged and pleaded with her to just drop the subject, but she demanded proof and credible sources of information. Some children were even valiant enough to promise Eleanor an invite to their birthday party if she promised never to cross the bridge. But stubborn little Eleanor wouldn't listen to reason or bribery. She swore to them that she would prove that the old bridge was nothing to fear, using a hand-me-down camera that she had gotten for her 9th birthday. "Tonight, I'm going to cross that old bridge," she said, "and then you'll see how foolish you all are." There was no way to stop her from killing herself without putting effort into trying. Distraught, some of the sweet and generous children of decided they would try to be at least nice to her on her last day alive. Well, all of them except for Patty, who wasn't too keen on being the stupidest kid in school again, by not stealing dessert from her or throwing worms at her during recess. Eleanor didn't appreciate their efforts. That night, Eleanor snuck out of the safety of her home, biked to the park, and struggled over the gate. Tonight was a pretty particularly foggy night, and it took her much longer than expected to get to the bridge. Apparently, the gate wasn't the only precautions that the grown-ups took. They also changed the paths around, so the only way to get to the bridge was by following winding deer paths through the marshy part of the woods. It was eerily quiet. No owls hooted and no crickets chirped. Any reasonable person would have recognized this silence as an omen of a terrible tragedy to come. But not the girl who denied even the existence of moon vampires. Armed with only her reckless self-confidence and a flashlight, Eleanor walked to her own demise. By the time she found the bridge, it was nearly 10:15. Widely known in the town of to be the most sinister of times. I mean, obviously this was true. Obviously this was true. Why else would the grown-ups rush them to their rooms and demand they sleep until sunrise promised their safety? Eleanor was either willingly ignoring the time, or she just didn't know its significance as she turned on the camera. Eleanor gave a cheery smile to the camera and said her hellos, almost passing as a normal little girl, until she went into a smug little rant about how stupid she thought everybody else was, and how she couldn't wait to see the looks on their faces when she proved to them that she was right. She was so self-satisfied that God himself probably considered striking her down with a lightning bolt for being so prideful. But then he decided he was better off not wasting his precious time. She lifted her foot to step on the bridge, but she hesitated, as if for just 1 second, the ignorance clouding her mind had cleared. It wasn't too late to turn back. If she chickened out now, the other children would surely only make fun of her cowardice for a couple of weeks. And as a bonus, she wouldn't suffer what would likely be a horrible, horrible death. After an agonizing 12 seconds of thought, Eleanor put her foot down on the stone of the bridge. When she wasn't immediately exploded into confetti or elsewise killed, she let out a whoop of celebration and started bragging incessantly to her camera. Meanwhile, God was probably reconsidering his leniency. As she walked, she prattled on and on to the camera and bragged about how clever she was. In all, it took nearly 5 minutes of righteous self-blabbering before Ellen realized that something was amiss. It's a pretty long bridge, isn't it? Thinking that she had just misjudged the width of the river. Eleanor peeked over the railing to see that there was nothing below her. And it's so foggy, I can't see a thing. Maybe people have gone missing because they fell off. Despite her efforts to see the river, she couldn't even hear it, no matter how much she tried to clean and pop her ears. The fog made it impossible to find. But it had to be there, right? And so she continued on, every step making her more and more anxious. At this rate, her camera was gonna run out of batteries. Any rational person would have turned tail and run, screaming like a banshee that had just stepped on a Lego. But again, Eleanor hesitated. She checked the time on the watch that she had borrowed from her stepmother, as if it was gonna tick out, "Nope, everything is perfectly normal. Do carry on," in Morse code. Huh, this surely must be broken. I haven't been walking for a whole 30 minutes. Her panic rose when she checked to see how long the camera had been recording. Eleanor hadn't pressed the button, and this whole time she'd been talking to no one like a complete maniac. Before she even had time to swear out loud, her flashlight had the nerve to flicker. Not only had she forgotten to record the experience, she had left the spare batteries at home. Eleanor was in trouble, though she didn't realize how much trouble she was in. Even now, she thought that the worst that would happen is she would get lost on the way home without any light to guide her way. Her shoulders slumped in. With a pout, she turned around and headed back. Before her batteries could die completely, she felt almost as dumb as she was, wandering into the woods so underprepared. Cockiness killed the cat, Eleanor supposed. Though, by killed, she actually meant non-lethally inconvenienced. maybe she would try again tomorrow night. It felt like 3 hours had passed, but in reality, it was closer to 2.5. Eleanor, patron saint of not believing anything without proof, ignored the very real evidence of her stepmother's watch, telling her that it was almost 1 in the morning. Unable to control herself anymore, she burst into a sprint and ran just as fast as her little legs would carry her, desperate to see the bank of the river. Her flashlight gave out, and so did her confidence. She screamed as loudly as she could and fell into a heap on the cold stone bridge. What was she supposed to do now? Turning back clearly wasn't any good, and seeing as the park was closed, there would be no one around to hear her pitiful cries for help. So, Eleanor gave up. Instead of running around and screaming, she opted to just sit there and wait for sun to come up. Surely it would be a waste of energy to do anything else. Hours passed by, slower than maple syrup out of a too-cold fridge. Eleanor did anything she could think of to pass the time. Practiced multiplication in her head, figured out what she was going to tell her father when he found out that she had snuck out all night. Anything. Anything but acknowledge that maybe she was never getting off this bridge alive. Though, instead of fearing monsters, she was still afraid of earthly things, like dying to wolves, or boredom. To prevent at least one of these things, Eleanor put on her camera, for real this time, and she began to record her goodbyes. At the very least, she thought she could delete it if it turned out okay. As if on cue, a light in her peripheral caught her attention. She quickly turned the camera off and got to her feet. Was it the sun already? No, it wasn't the right color. It was too small. What could it be? Hey, help! Like a moth drawn to a bug zapper, Eleanor scrambled to her feet and darted for the light. Help me! Hello? The light, or more accurately, the ancient old lady holding the light, responded. Are you lost, little girl? Eleanor slowed to a quick jog, tears of relief welling in her eyes. No child in the entire world had ever been so happy to see a weird stranger on the bridge. Yes. Oh, thank you so much. I was so worried I would never see anyone again. She couldn't yet see that the old lady had no eyes, and her right arm appeared to be made of solid gold. She didn't see how many rows of bristle-like teeth, or the fingers that seemed to have twice as many bones as they should have. If she had, she probably would have stopped herself before running straight into the monster's arms and hugging her closely. Please, will you take me home? The monster was taken aback. She'd eaten so many children, but this one was the first one to give herself up so quickly. It was fortunate for Eleanor. If the monster were more focused, she would have unhinged her jaw and swallowed her whole right there, before Eleanor even had a chance to look up and realize that she was in mortal danger. With a scream, she threw herself off the monster and back the way she came, without even looking back to confirm what she saw was real. Skeptic or not, she was more prepared to face the lonely bridge before facing what seemed to be an actual monster. The old woman regained her wits and let out a cackle before chasing Eleanor. Don't you want my help anymore? Her feet pitter-pattered in such a way that sounded like she had 3 sets of feet. Eleanor had never been an athletic child, and she was still plump with baby fat and too many Christmas sweets. But there was something about being terrified half to death that really gets the adrenaline pumping. Slow down, sweetie. It's been too long since I've had a good meal. I can't keep up. Eleanor never listened. But for once it did her some good. Her lungs burned as she gasped in just enough air to help her get to safety. Though she didn't know it, the other children's carefulness was saving her. The monster was weak from hunger, and she actually stood a chance of surviving. She was panting too hard to hear the river babbling below her. Her eyes were too clouded with tears for her to see that the sun was rising, and the fog was fading away. The moment the morning light reached down to the bridge, the monster let out this horrible screech and quickly scurried down into the river. But Eleanor was still running. She was running until she was off the bridge and out of the woods. Finally, she slowed down to a walk and let her lungs rest. She'd done it. She had survived the old bridge. With the start, Eleanor looked at her camera and nearly sobbed with joy. The whole thing had been recorded. There was concrete proof of a horrible monster and her escaping. Heck, she'd only really screamed once, so she would probably look pretty brave, right? All the other children would be really impressed with her. Her tearful rejoicing settled. It settled into a worried frown. If this was true, what else was? Was Mr. Mason really a demon? Did she really have to worry about sewer clowns and moon vampires and ghosts? Heck, it didn't matter. All that mattered is she survived. And if she could survive this, she could survive any crazy old thing. Her confidence rose again. No longer was she blind to the world around her. Now she knew better. And she would use her knowledge for good. Where did that old bridge monster come from? Clearly it was weak to sunlight and it only lived in darkness. So maybe she could destroy it. But she would need help. The other children knew things, but they were too afraid to fight it. It was time for that to change. Things in this town were going to be completely different from now on. Together they would rid the town of whatever monsters may plague it. Eleanor sprinted off of the bridge and through the woods, breaking out into the road leading back home, and blam. The truck had seemingly come out of nowhere, flattening Eleanor before she knew what hit her. Literally. And thus, the first child to ever survive crossing the old bridge had died. Not because of the monster that haunted it, but because she was too stupid to look both ways before crossing the street. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. It's a little bit of a different story, but I thought it was pretty good. If you want to support the channel, please go over to the Patreon, which is linked in the description. You could be one of these current lovely fuckers on screen right now. Come on, you know you want to be a patron. There's a nice little backlog of Patreon stories, which I haven't been keeping up with, but I promise one's coming. I said this on the main channel. I'm going to say it here too. With the holidays coming up and all that stuff, I really am going to try to stick to the Monday, Wednesday, Friday upload. But if I miss a day or something, please don't be too upset. All right. On to the people on screen. Dan R. Neophyte Games. Chaos X. Mr. Swiston. Official Jerboa. J.Y. Pyromancer. Hayden M.H. Ethan A. Daniel H. Maximilian Charles P. Deneen H. and Go Cute Puppy. LLC. I love that name. Guys, really, thank you so much. I say it every time, and I will say it again until it somehow magically becomes untrue. You really do help keep this channel alive.